In the autumn of 1944, the Western Front was alive with movement. Allied armies had broken out from Normandy and were driving east across France, liberating town after town as the German army fell back in disarray. Yet by mid-September, that momentum had begun to slow. Supply lines stretched thin, fuel shortages plagued the American columns, and bad weather settled across Europe. In the Lorraine region of eastern France, the U.S. Third Army, commanded by General George S. Patton, halted near the Moselle River. The men were tired but confident. They believed the German army was finished. But deep inside Germany, a new plan was forming, one that would soon test that confidence and create one of the most surprising tank battles of the war. The Germans called it Operation Nibelungen. Its goal was simple: strike westward through the fog of Lorraine, recapture lost ground, and destroy Patton's spearhead before it reached the German frontier. The weapon they would rely on was the Panther tank, the pride of the Panzer divisions. With thick, sloped armor and a powerful 75mm gun, the Panther was feared across Europe. American soldiers knew that in open combat, a Sherman tank stood little chance against it. But in war, battles are rarely fought on paper. Arracourt, a quiet French village surrounded by rolling hills and open farmland, lay at the center of Patton's advance. It was here that the 4th Armored Division, specifically its Combat Command A, dug in to defend. The division was led by Major General John S. Wood, a bold and unorthodox commander, while its tank battalions were seasoned veterans of Normandy. Among them was the 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, a man whose name would one day be given to America's main battle tank. His men were battle-hardened, disciplined, and aggressive. They had learned to fight not by standing toe-to-toe with superior German armor, but by outthinking it, outmaneuvering it, and using every advantage the battlefield could offer. The terrain around Arracourt was deceptive. From a distance it looked open, a perfect field for armored warfare. But in truth, it was broken country, dotted with hedgerows, ridgelines, and patches of dense fog that rolled in each morning. For the Germans, that fog promised surprise. For the Americans, it promised opportunity. Each side believed it could use the mist to strike unseen. In the early hours of September 19, 1944, the fog was so thick that visibility dropped to less than 100 meters. Hidden within it, German tanks of the 111th and 113th Panzer brigades began to move. They were young units, filled with new crews and hastily trained replacements. Many of their officers had little combat experience. They believed that surprise would compensate for their inexperience. Ahead of them lay the thin lines of the 4th Armored Division. The Germans expected to find a weak screen of reconnaissance troops. Instead, they would meet some of the most experienced tankers in the U.S. Army. At dawn, the sound of engines echoed through the fog. American outposts heard the rumble of heavy armor approaching, but could see nothing. Reports crackled over the radio, enemy tanks moving from the east, unseen but unmistakable. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams ordered his companies to prepare for contact. The Shermans, light compared to the Panthers, took up concealed positions behind ridges and hedgerows. Their commanders knew that if they could strike the German tanks from the flank or the rear, they could penetrate even the thickest armor. At around 7 o'clock, shadows emerged from the mist. A column of Panthers advanced down a narrow road, their guns searching for targets. Unaware they had been spotted, they pressed forward until the lead tank crested a ridge. From concealment below, a Sherman fired. The armor-piercing shell slammed into the Panther's side, igniting its fuel. The German tank erupted in flames. The others stopped, unsure where the shot had come from. In that confusion, more Shermans opened fire. Within minutes, several Panthers were burning. The survivors turned and withdrew into the fog, firing blindly as they retreated. It was the first of many clashes that day. All along the front near Arracourt, isolated American units found themselves face to face with German armored thrusts. In one engagement, a handful of Shermans, no more than 5, held off an entire company of Panthers advancing in column. Using the fog to mask their movements, the Americans shifted positions constantly, striking from unexpected angles. When one Sherman was hit, the others kept firing. By the time the fog lifted, the German formation was shattered, its advance halted. What made these encounters remarkable was not the sheer bravery of the crews, though that was undeniable, but the discipline and tactical coordination that underpinned their actions. Each tank commander trusted his training. They fired only when certain of a hit, used smoke to obscure their movements, and relied on radio communication to coordinate attacks. In contrast, The German crews often advanced without proper reconnaissance or artillery support. Many of them were cut off from their commanders by poor radio communication. They had been told that the American tanks were weak, that one Panther could destroy several Shermans without effort. At Arracourt, that illusion vanished. As the morning battles gave way to afternoon, the fog began to lift. What it revealed was a battlefield littered with burning tanks, many of them German. The Americans had taken losses, but the bulk of their defensive line held firm. Now, with clear skies, they called in their most potent weapon, air power. The roar of P-47 Thunderbolts filled the air as waves of fighter bombers descended on the exposed German columns. Rockets and bombs slammed into the fields, scattering the remaining Panthers. Smoke rose high into the sky as the German attack faltered. By the end of the day, the 5th Panzer Army's opening strike had failed. Dozens of German tanks lay wrecked or burning in the countryside. Yet their commanders refused to concede. Believing the American defenses were stretched thin, they prepared to attack again the next morning. What they did not realize was that every failed assault only strengthened the American position. Each engagement taught the U.S. crews more about how to exploit the fog, how to coordinate artillery, and how to fight a defensive armored battle with precision. The Battle of Arracourt was far from over. Over the next 10 days, waves of German armor would crash against the American lines, each time with diminishing results. The myth of invincible German armor was being tested not in massive numbers or superior guns, but in the quiet skill of American crews who knew how to fight smart. The fields of Lorraine would soon bear witness to one of the most lopsided armored victories of the entire war. The morning after the first clashes, the fog once again settled across the Lorraine countryside. The smell of burned fuel hung in the air, drifting over fields still littered with the wrecks of German tanks. For the soldiers of the 4th Armored Division, the quiet was uneasy. They knew the enemy would try again, and they were right. Before sunrise, the distant thud of engines rolled through the mist. The German 111th Panzer Brigade was regrouping for another assault, determined to break through to Arracourt and retake the high ground that dominated the valley. As the columns moved forward, confusion spread within the German ranks. Their maps were inaccurate, their radios unreliable, and the dense fog erased all sense of direction. Some Panther crews advanced toward friendly units by mistake, others drove straight into ambush zones already covered by American artillery observers. When the first German tanks appeared near Lizy and Juvilliers, American gunners were ready. Hidden 105mm howitzers opened fire, and within minutes, smoke and explosions consumed the fields. The Panthers pressed on, their armor absorbing near misses, but as they crested a ridge, Sherman tanks, waiting in hull-down positions, struck their sides at close range. The precision of American fire stunned the attackers. From his command post, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams directed his battalion with calm efficiency. He shifted units like chess pieces, reinforcing threatened sectors while keeping mobile reserves hidden behind terrain folds. His doctrine was simple: never fight the Germans on their terms. Instead of forming static lines, Abrams kept his companies flexible, allowing them to maneuver independently, yet support each other through radio coordination. When a German spearhead broke through, nearby platoons moved swiftly to counterattack from the flanks. This method turned the battlefield into a fluid trap, where every German advance exposed its sides to converging fire. By midday, visibility improved slightly. The German commanders finally caught glimpses of the American positions and realized they were facing far more organized resistance than intelligence had reported. But by then, it was too late to withdraw. American artillery was already adjusting fire, and forward air controllers, operating from jeeps with simple radios, began calling in air strikes. Moments later, the sky filled with the roar of P-47 Thunderbolts diving through gaps in the clouds. Their rockets tore through German columns, igniting fuel and ammunition. Pilots reported seeing tanks exploding one after another, their turrets blown clear from the hulls. The coordination between ground and air was seamless, one of the greatest strengths of the U.S. Army by 1944. Still, the fighting remained brutal. On the southern flank, small groups of German infantry used Panzerfausts to stalk American tanks from close range. In response, Sherman crews fired canister rounds and called for mortar support to clear the hedgerows. The battle evolved into a deadly rhythm of advance, retreat, and counterattack, all within a fog that distorted distance and muffled sound. The Germans fought with courage, but lacked cohesion. Their attacks came piecemeal, each brigade acting independently, without clear coordination from higher command. What had begun as a planned armored thrust was dissolving into isolated duels. By late afternoon, the thunder of battle faded. American patrols moved cautiously through the drifting smoke, counting the cost. More than 30 German tanks lay destroyed or abandoned across the sector, many with hatches open where crews had fled. American losses were light by comparison. For the first time, the soldiers realized they were not merely holding the line, they were winning. Radio reports from captured prisoners confirmed it. German morale was breaking. One officer admitted his men were shocked at how effectively the Shermans used the terrain and the fog against them. The Panthers' long-range advantage had meant nothing when they couldn't see their targets. That night, as darkness settled over Arracourt, the men of the 4th Armored Division dug in again, their tank engines idling in the chill evening air. Some cleaned their guns, others slept beside their vehicles. Overhead, distant flashes marked the front lines still burning. They knew the next day would bring more fighting, but confidence had replaced uncertainty. The myth of the unstoppable Panther was beginning to crumble, and the Americans understood that their combination of discipline, mobility, and coordination was slowly turning a German offensive into a costly defeat. The Battle of Arracourt was only halfway through, yet its outcome was already being written in fire and steel across the misty fields of Lorraine.
By September 21st, the battle around Arracourt had become a test of endurance. Each day began the same way, with a heavy fog blanketing the hills and valleys, and each day the German armor tried again to break through. Yet every attempt ended the same way, burning Panthers scattered across the fields and Shermans still holding the ridgelines. The German 5th Panzer Army, once confident of a quick victory, was now struggling to understand how smaller American units could consistently outfight them. That morning, a new assault was launched toward the villages of Lizy and Arracourt. The German plan called for coordinated attacks by multiple brigades, but confusion and poor communication disrupted it almost immediately. Instead of striking together, the German units advanced separately, each isolated by the thick fog and uncertain of its neighbors' positions. American observers, listening to the growing noise of tank engines, relayed exact coordinates to artillery batteries. Shells began to fall along the expected German approach routes, tearing gaps in their formations before the tanks even reached contact. On one sector, near Lizy, 5 Shermans from Company C of the 37th Tank Battalion took position on a low ridge. From there, they could overlook the valley below without exposing their silhouettes. Through the haze, they saw movement, dark shapes, at least a dozen of them, advancing slowly. The Americans waited, their gunners holding fire until the Panthers presented their flanks. At 200 yards, the lead Sherman fired, striking the first Panther square in the side.
The explosion illuminated the fog for a brief moment.
2 more shots followed, and within minutes, several German tanks were ablaze. The survivors turned to engage, but in the confusion they exposed themselves to crossfire. When the smoke cleared, nearly the entire German column was destroyed. The American crews barely had time to register what they had done before orders came over the radio to reposition and prepare for the next attack. Throughout the day, similar engagements unfolded across the battlefield. The Americans fought not as stationary defenders but as mobile hunters. They used terrain features, ridge lines, hedgerows, and depressions, to mask movement, striking from multiple angles and retreating before counterfire could pin them down. Whenever the Germans managed to break through a weak point, Abrams' reserves moved quickly to cut them off, surrounding and eliminating isolated enemy tanks. The Shermans' mobility proved as valuable as their guns. Their engines, lighter and more reliable than the Panthers, allowed rapid movement even over muddy ground. As the fog lifted around midday, the full scope of the German losses became clear. Fields that had been silent pastures only days before were now littered with twisted steel. Smoke rose from dozens of wrecks. Some Panthers had been abandoned intact, their fuel exhausted, their crews fled on foot. Others had been destroyed by direct hits, their turrets blown off by internal explosions. Captured German prisoners spoke of chaos within their ranks, conflicting orders, jammed radios, and air attacks that scattered their formations. Many of the young tank crews had never fought in conditions like these. They had been trained for open, sweeping offensives, not blind duels in fog and mud. Meanwhile, American morale was soaring. The men of the 4th Armored Division understood they were participating in something extraordinary. The myth of German invincibility, so deeply ingrained after years of war, was being dismantled before their eyes. In mess tents and foxholes, word spread quickly. A handful of Shermans had stopped entire German columns. Tankers swapped stories of narrow escapes and perfect shots, of coordination that seemed almost instinctive. Every engagement reinforced their belief that discipline and teamwork could defeat any weapon the enemy possessed. By the evening of September 21st, the German offensive was faltering. Their commanders still believed victory was possible if they could regroup and strike again, but fuel shortages, disorganization, and mounting losses were eroding that hope. Patton's headquarters received reports showing over 100 German tanks destroyed or abandoned since the battle began, while American losses remained comparatively small. For the first time since Normandy, the initiative in an armored battle clearly belonged to the United States Army. As darkness fell, the front grew quiet. The fires of destroyed tanks flickered across the landscape, casting long shadows in the drifting mist. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of artillery rolled across the valley, a reminder that the fighting was not yet done. But in the calm that followed, one truth had become undeniable. The German counteroffensive had failed to achieve surprise, and the men of the 4th Armored Division had turned the battlefield of Arracourt into a graveyard for the mighty Panthers. By the morning of September 25th, the Battle of Arracourt had reached its breaking point. What began as a confident German counteroffensive was now a desperate struggle to survive. The 5th Panzer Army had thrown nearly all of its strength into the fight. Panthers, Panzer IVs, and armored infantry, but the effort had collapsed under the weight of confusion, fog, and relentless American counterattacks. The fields east of Arracourt were littered with wreckage, blackened by days of fire and smoke. The once proud German brigades had been reduced to scattered pockets, fighting without fuel, ammunition, or direction. As dawn broke, the weather finally cleared. The fog that had shrouded Lorraine for a week lifted to reveal the full devastation below. American reconnaissance aircraft circled overhead, marking targets for artillery and airstrikes. Columns of U.S. tanks advanced cautiously through the haze, their commanders scanning for movement among the ruined villages. Occasionally, a lone German tank would appear on the horizon, firing a single desperate shot before being destroyed by combined American firepower. The battle that had begun with uncertainty was now firmly in Allied control.
For the men of the 417th Armored Division, exhaustion mixed with pride.
They had fought almost continuously for a week, in mud, fog, and constant danger. Yet their discipline had never faltered. They had learned to read the battlefield, to move, fire, and communicate as a single, coordinated machine. In the chaos of modern warfare, that skill proved more powerful than any weapon. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, calm and methodical throughout the campaign, surveyed the smoking fields and understood what had been achieved. His battalion, outnumbered and often isolated, had destroyed more than 10 times its own number of enemy tanks. It was not luck, it was leadership, communication, and the courage of ordinary soldiers. German prisoners spoke with disbelief. They had been told that the American Sherman was inferior, that it could not stand against the Panther. But the men of the 37th Tank Battalion had turned those weaknesses into advantages. They used mobility to outflank, teamwork to outthink, and terrain to outfight a superior weapon. Where the Germans relied on armor, the Americans relied on adaptability. In the end, it was the side that could improvise that survived. When the guns finally fell silent, the valley around Arracourt was quiet once more. The ground was scarred, the villages shattered, but the line had held. More than 200 German tanks and assault guns had been destroyed or abandoned. American losses were a fraction of that number. What had started as a German attempt to reclaim momentum in the West had ended in one of their most devastating defeats since Normandy. The Battle of Arracourt was not just a victory of tanks, it was a victory of intelligence over arrogance, of coordination over confusion. In the days that followed, the 4th Armored Division pressed eastward toward the German border, leaving behind a landscape of wrecked steel. Reporters who visited the area wrote of fields filled with burned Panthers and the unmistakable scent of fuel and smoke that still hung in the air. To the German command, the defeat was a grim reminder that the war in the West was turning decisively against them. To the Americans, it was proof that the lessons of years of combat, mobility, flexibility, and teamwork had transformed them into one of the most capable armored forces in the world. Today, the hills around Arracourt are peaceful.
Crops grow where tank tracks once cut deep into the earth.
The villages have been rebuilt, the scars of battle faded. But beneath that quiet landscape lies the story of one of World War II's most remarkable victories, a moment when a handful of American tank crews defied the odds and reshaped the legend of armored warfare. The Battle of Arracourt stands as a lasting reminder that no machine, however powerful, can replace the courage, coordination, and determination of those who fight together with a single purpose.